Hi, I'm Pat Garland Stewart, and welcome to the Goat Keepers School. We are up in the attic studio, doing the best that we can do. I don't think you really want to see the mess behind the drapes. We'll be putting together video clips from outside as well as things up here up in the attic, so that you can get a good idea of what it takes to take care of goats. But I wanted to start out with a little bit about me and how I got into this, and whether or not you want to listen to me. Um, and also about why goats in general. Okay, I started out in a suburb of Detroit as a city girl. Goats were never on my radar. They were not something I really wanted to do. Um, my father told me they were pretty much good for nothing, and my mom would like to think that they never even existed. But I went into the field of parks and recreation, especially environmental interpretation, education about wildlife and about farm animals, as became my specialty. And I quickly realized that people didn't know where their food came from, especially kids, and that I wanted to do something about that. So I created Hames and Axel Farm, which at that time was an educational service that went into schools. I needed a portable milk supply, and cows did not fit in my 1986 Dodge Colt, but a Nigerian dwarf goat did. So that's how I got started on my journey with goats. Shortly after we started the farm education service, standardized testing came into place, which actually relegated agriculture to 1 week in kindergarten. And the business had to take a new direction. So we focused more on Nigerian dwarf goats and on making goat milk soap. So I bought my first goats from Ann Peterson at Rosa Sharn Farm. And I was afraid to ask Ann any questions. I didn't want to be a pest. We were 2.5 hours away from each other. So I learned the hard way on a lot of things. I did make friends with people who had goats. So, like Dennis Cronin helped me and taught me how to disbud. But I didn't feel like I really had anybody that I could call on. So I learned the hard way. I learned that goats are not funny looking sheep. And eventually, Ann and I became very good friends, but it became obvious that I was helping a lot of people, more than I expected. So rather than answer the same questions a million times, I wrote a book called Personal Milkers, which wound up requiring that I still answer the same questions a million times. But people could buy the book, and it's available at lulu.com, and have the resource for themselves if they choose to use it. I tried to publish it conventionally, and publishing houses didn't want to deal with a single breed. They thought the Nigerian dwarf goats were too narrow a focus. But I know that they are the largest growing section of the dairy goat business. They are making goats much more a part of reality for veterinarians. They are making it possible for people in cities to have their own milk supply. Yet there are still very few books out there that deal with them in specific. Personal Milkers is one of them. A woman in Midwest wrote another one years ago. It's been overlooked. And Sue Weaver talks about them in her Stories Guide to Miniature Livestock. But they, unless you are familiar with working around farm animals, it can be hard to make the adjustment from a full-size goat down to a Nigerian. So that's why I started my book. That's why I've started this goat keeping class. Um, so that's my background. If you want to keep going, you can. All right. Um, Nigerian dwarf goats came to this country in the 1980s as livestock feed for farm animals like hippopotamus and lions in zoos. They were easily reproducible, they were easy to ship. And a group of people found them also to be quite charming and realized that the West African dwarf, which was this breed that was being brought over, had two different aspects to it. In wildlife, we might call it phases. One is a pygmy style, really stocky, short bodies, wide heads, and unfortunately narrow pelvises. Or the goats that became Nigerian dwarf goats, which were aerodynamic head, wide pelvises, a nice long bone pattern. When we say bone pattern, if we look at my little drawing that Ellen Chapman drew for me, the bone pattern is the space that's most easily judged from the knee down to the hock. Is that long and flat boned, or is it stocky and round boned? Round and stocky is more pygmy type. Long and flinty, they call it, are dairy type. So those long and flinty goats became the progenitors of the Nigerian dwarf goat. Now, why goats at all? I mean, they can be hard to keep in. They talk back to you. Why bother with them? And part of my love for them is that they talk back to me. They do keep me on my toes. They're never dull. In fact, goats were among, if not the very first, among the first domestic animals ever domesticated by human beings. They learned that people would feed them. And they learned that people didn't necessarily hurt them. People learned that they can be a friend. They can carry something for you. They also learned that they gave good milk and that they also had good meat. And their skin was very usable, and everything in them was easy to attain. So they began following the nomadic people. And goats are by nature nomads. They don't do very well in long-term confinement on a small space. But if you can rotate that small space around, or if you can give them a walk around, they don't need to have acres and acres of land. Nigerian dwarf goats can be happy in a small space, and we'll talk more about that later on in the class. But humans at that point were traveling for the seasons, and goats could fend for themselves. They could go off, find what they wanted, and then come back for some love and attention, because goats do really make friends. They are not somebody, excuse me for trying to primp, they are not animals that are indifferent to humans, which is why I strive to make sure that the people who buy my goats are in it for the long haul. And if you're thinking about buying goats, please think about the long haul. The long haul can be 10 years or more. I have goats here that live to be 16 years old. The oldest one I know of is 21, and I've met a 19-year-old. But they tend to have different sets of diseases and different sets of issues as they get older. And finding vets who can handle that is a little tricky. So if you're thinking about getting goats, or if you have goats already, make sure your vet is prepared to deal with what my sister calls the old goat diseases. We'll talk more about that in a subsequent class. But what do you know about goats? And I really wish that you were here in the attic with me so that I could ask you directly. But I'm going to guess at what most people know. Most people know that they eat everything, which makes them great for brush control. Well, they will eat a lot of things. They prefer to eat things that are from the chest, for the brisket, up. They don't want to bend down and get their food. They'd rather reach up and, in fact, climb for it. So some of you may have heard commercials or seen products with argan oil in it. Argan oil is harvested from the argan nut, the argan seed from the argan berry, which comes from argan trees, but is not harvested by people. It's harvested by goats who climb on the argan trees, and they pick it, they chew it, they process the meat pulp, the juicy aspect, and they poop out the seed. And those seeds, are then pounded and pulverized and squeezed into argan oil, which is a very painstaking process, but it requires goats in its primitive form. There are now attempts to do it on a commercial scale, which will bring the price down, but it will probably also bring the quality down. Because who knows what magic the goats do to it. But that type of climbing mentality is what makes goats a challenge. They love to be up high. They love to see if they can go higher. So if your fences are not tight or are not electrified, they will see how high they can go. Now, the problem with goats eat everything is that they don't. The old wives' tale of them eating tin cans, they're not trying to eat the tin cans. In the old days especially, the glue that was used on the labels for the cans was wheat-based. Well, goats like wheat. It's not good for them, but they like it. So they would be chewing off the paper, which is palatable for a goat, and trying to get that wheat-based glue off. They didn't chew the can, but they might be interested in the tomato sauce or whatever was on the inside of the can. In fact, metal inside a stomach is a really bad idea. So we don't encourage people to let their goats eat out of cans. Now, the other problem with them eating everything is that they may or may not know what's good for them in the wild. So we raise our animals organically without organic feed. I can't afford organic feed, but I can not use chemical pesticides and herbicides. I can do things kind of the old-fashioned way of maybe burning them off, but more than likely pulling them up. And the things that I worry about are cherry trees. We have wild cherry and pin cherry here. Mountain laurel, which is a wild rhododendron. Sheep laurel, which is also in the rhododendron family. We have maidenhair fern, which is very rare, so I don't worry about that too much. And here in New England, we also have bracken fern. And bracken fern is kind of all over the world now. It's a pain in the butt. My goats don't want to eat bracken fern, so if I give them other options, they leave it alone. They'll trample it down. They won't eat it. Other people have had goats live in bracken fern pastures, and they're fine. I actually think that it probably tastes bad, but in a pinch, they'll eat it. And it, along with oak leaves, if it's their only food, the toxins, the tannins that are in those plants will pile on into their goat systems and make them sick. So diversity is really important if you're going to be letting them out to browse, which I recommend you do. But don't count on just pasture because they're not very good lawnmowers. I have some goats that will eat grass. I have some goats that refuse to eat grass. And I've had over 500 goats here in my lifetime with these goats. I have about 80 here right now. Of those 80, I have about 6 yearlings that will go to town on new pasture. The others wait till leaves fall because they want those things that are up high. So, what else do you know about goats? They get into trouble. Yep, they do. They're easily bored. They like puzzles. So giving them toys, giving them electrical wire spools, cut tree stumps, rocks. Here in New England, we have ample rocks. We have ample tree stumps. Those are natural toys for them. You can give them playhouses. You can give them children's toys and slides. Those things all keep them occupied so they don't try to get out. But you have to make sure that when you put them out there, they don't get near the fence line because they will use them as a launching pad to get out. And goats can jump. They can almost fly if they really want to get someplace. There's a great video that you may be able to find online of a goat that uses a tree trunk on its back end and its head on its front hooves on its front end, and it climbs up backwards up a tree, pulling itself up on the front so that it can get up over the 5-foot fence line. So how would you stop that? I would actually attach the tree to the fence line, that he can't get his body between the two. Or you can move the fence line further away from the tree. But those are some of the issues you have to deal with. I did have a goat whose name is Mudslide, and Mud actually, you could use her lip to slide the thumb tab down on a dog leash. So we would use that dog leash clip as a secondary latch because the goat-proof latches aren't goat-proof. She would use her nose to open up the goat-proof latch unless we had that clip on there. So I came in the barn one morning and my herd was all out. All my does were out. And luckily when my goats get out, they just sit around and wait for me to put them back in because getting out was the challenge. Being outside was not that much fun. But I kind of vented at my son who was at school and said, "You didn't put the secondary latch on the gate." So I got all the girls back in the pasture, closed the gate behind them, put the secondary latch on, and finished my chores. And I was milking, my back was to the gate, and I started to hear this ka-thunk, 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 and then chunk. And I turned around, and there was Mudslide. Her head was sticking out of the gate. She'd done it again. My son had not screwed up. She had just learned how to flip that thing around so that she could slide the tab down, knock it off with her nose, then use her nose to open up the goat-proof latch and get out. So we solved that by using a carabiner with a screw on. Okay? If you use a screw-on carabiner, you should confound your goats. I can't promise. You may have a gifted one, but it should work. Now, why do people have goats? Well, brush goats is one of them. Also, people want dairy. They want milk. Some people want meat. Some people want to drive their goats. And you can drive Nigerian dwarf goats. I would not recommend an adult being driven by two. But if you can train a 4-up or a 6-up, they can handle an adult. A 2-up can handle children. There are resources which I can put online so that you can find more about driving goats because it's really cool. I drive horses. I'm a little too heavy for my goats to drive me, but I'm really glad that that option is out there. And if my child were not 26 years old, I probably would be training them to drive. And lastly, just as pets. Also, goats have been proven to be really good therapy animals. Nigerian dwarf goats love children. They're not as large as an Alpine or a Nubian. And if you want something that's easily pick-upable, a Nigerian is a great option. I have found that raw goat's milk, particularly my Nigerian's milk, because that's what I'm familiar with, has been helpful for some families that have children with either allergies or autism. And goats are very good with autistic kids. They somehow understand. So if you have a person in your family on the spectrum, goats can be a very good tool to help that person learn to calm down, to control themselves, and to just have a buddy, because goats really are good friends. All right. So how big are Nigerian dwarf goats? Well, that can be quite a statement to answer. So here are some pictures. The Nigerian dwarf goats can range from 14 inches full grown to over 22 and a half inches full grown for a doe. They're only supposed to be 22 and a half inches tall to be within the standard. But there are those that are outliers that will grow too large. Their milk is still good. They still make great pets. They're still great goats. They're just not show-worthy. But that's about the size of a Labrador Retriever. That's smaller than a Newfoundland. I have a Great Pyrenees cross, who you'll meet later. And they're smaller than Pippi by a long shot. So, also people look at the baby goats and think they're going to stay that small. If anybody looked at you when you were 1 week old, they would certainly not expect you to stay that small. So just use your brains and realize that they're going to grow up. They're not going to be done growing at 1 year old, even 2 years old. Some of them will grow to be 3 years old, and I've seen bucks keep growing till they're 6. So they're going to change in appearance, either height or width. They're going to go from a very baby face to a more matronly face in the case of a doe. So you need to realize that what works for them at 3 months old is not going to work for them when they're 3 years old. So make sure that house that you make for them, whatever you choose to use for house, and we'll talk about that in a subsequent class, will fit them when they're aged. Okay? So size-wise, figure smaller than a Labrador Retriever, probably wider than a Labrador Retriever when they get full grown. What colors are they in? I don't care. That's my druthers. I don't care what color they are. I have some that I love the colors of. I have one here, two here that are here because of their colors, but I didn't buy them because of their colors. They were born here, and I decided because I like that color pattern, I wanted to keep them here. I have never made a selection of a goat based upon its color pattern. To me, the only color that matters is the color of the milk, and it better be white. So, what color they can be anything from solid white to solid black and everything in the middle. They're not, well, I can't say they're not purple. There is something called a lavender chamois. They can be solid colored, they can be speckled. They can have white legs, they can have black legs. I don't care. If you're just having them as pets, then color matters. If you're having them as breeding stock, then how they're put together matters. What their milk tastes like for a female matters. What their personalities are like matters, both male or female. Those are the things that matter to me. Okay? How much do they cost? You can probably find a Nigerian wether for $50 to $75. All right? Depending upon where you live in the country, in New England, I would never buy an animal that cheap. I would never, ever, ever suggest you buy a goat from an auction. My Nigerian dwarf goat wether started at $125 for the first one and $100 for each one after that. I do not let goats go to a place where there's only one goat in the farm. They need to have companionship. And some people say, I want to be my companion to my goat. Are you going to take it to work with you? Are you going to bring it in your bed with you when it's cold and rainy? I don't think so. A goat is there when you want it, but a goat needs things whether you're there or not. Another goat will give them those things. It will give them that comfort. It will give them that security. In the wild, their horns are not all that helpful. Their speed is what keeps them safe. That and the fact that they hide in the middle of the herd. And they throw the weak one out to the lions, the jackals, the hyenas, whatever they're worried about. If there's no weak one to throw out, then they are the weak one in trouble. And so they spend the whole time, if they're alone, being freaked out that something's going to eat them. If they have a companion, they each think the other one can be thrown away. So please don't be selfish and keep a goat alone. Please find a goat a companion. All right? Because I don't let a goat go alone, I do discount the price of the second goat. If it's a wether. If it's a milker, it's the same price. I start most of my females at $400. I used to be at $300. The price of grain has not gone down in 20 years. The price of life has gone up. The price of keeping goats has gone up. So I've had to raise my prices. My goats are all registered with usually 2 registries, but even at 1 registry, $400. Why more for a doe than for a wether? Because a wether, you're getting just that animal, just that one goat. A doe, you're getting all the babies that she'll ever have for you. You're getting whatever milk she's ever going to give you. You're getting the beginning of a bloodline, the beginning of a future. That's worth the investment. Now, you can go up to spending $16,000 for a goat. If you just want a pet or you just want milkers, don't bother. If you really want to be breeding, then go ahead and pay that higher price. But make sure that you're getting the support from the breeder in the long term. And no matter what you pay, ask the following questions. Ask, has your herd ever been tested for CAE, which is caprine arthritic encephalitis? And what were the results? Don't stop at did you test and then not ask that second question. Have your goats ever had capious elephantitis, also called CL? Once it's on the ground, it's there for years and years. If they've ever had a goat with an abscess that was contagious, don't buy from there. Johne's disease is a common disease in the dairy cow world. It's now becoming more common in the dairy goat world. Both it and CAE are diseases which don't show up generally until the animal is weaker. But by that time, they've contaminated your soil and they've exposed every other animal in your herd to a very not incurable contagious disease. Why ask for trouble? Ask those questions. Now, I don't test for Johne's disease. So why do I tell you to test? I don't test because the place I got my goats from has never had a case of Johne's disease that she was unaware of. That she did have Johne's, she lost her entire herd, she had to move everything and start all over again. And so she's very, very careful about where her goats get their hay from. She doesn't even eat beef because of that. My source of hay, which is the primary place where they get the contagion, he does have cattle, but his cattle are animals that he keeps for generations. They don't die after a year. I've seen them when they're older. They're not sickly. There's no sign of Johne's in that herd. I did have somebody come here once and ask about testing, and I said, no, I don't test, and you can choose whether you buy from me or not. And his vet was like, well, you should test. And I said, the test is unreliable. The test takes a long time. It gives a lot of false positives and false negatives. And I have animals here that are 10, 12, 14, 16 years old. Would that be happening if my goats had Johne's? She said, no, your goats would not be getting that old. I said, well, as long as I continue to have older goats, that I won't test. If I have an animal succumbs at a younger age, then yeah, I'll go ahead and test. But it needs to be meeting the criteria of an animal wasting away very quickly, not able to keep weight on, diarrhea, just unhealthy very quickly. That has never happened in my herd. So, given that, I don't test. Other parts of the country, I would suggest you test. I've never had a CL case here on the farm. I don't test for CL. I don't vaccinate for CL. My animals don't go near anybody that ever has had CL. My goats don't go to major shows. I'm very picky about where my animals live. We don't have CL here, and we're not going to, as long as I continue to be as careful as I am. Okay. So, how much space do we need to have 1 or 2 goats? Well, we're going to talk more about housing and fencing in a subsequent class. But a 10 by 10 pen is enough for 2 little Nigerians, as long as they can get outside to run. You can take them on a walk. You can put a halter or a collar on them. I recommend a collar, not a halter. But give them some more exercise. And you can even go vertical. So they've got a 10-foot space, but they've got things to climb on. As long as they've got exercise and you clean up after them, the 10 by 10-foot space is fine. Now, getting that by your town, that may be a different story. So you've got to deal with your municipality. Okay? How many how many goats do I have? I said about 80. Of that, 12 of them are breeding males. I keep a lot of males around so I can see how they grow up. Generally, when I bring in new stock, I bring in males. Goats don't leave here because of old age. I don't donate them to somebody because I don't want to feed them when they're older. They didn't ask to be born. I asked for them to be born. So I feel responsibility to take care of them. I also have right now about 30 young stock that aren't bred yet. Either they were just born or they're yearlings that I wanted to let grow up a little bit. That leaves me with about 30 milking stock, of which some got bred and didn't take, some got bred, and I'm milking 17 right now. And some are retired. So that's bigger than I'd want it to be, and I need to pare it down, so I've got animals for sale. But it's hard for me to sell adults. That's just me. This is why I am a city girl farmer. I get attached. Okay? Why did I choose the Nigerian? Why do I think they make great pets? Their personality, their size, their portability, their milk, and their general health. When I got into the breed, they hadn't really succumbed to Johne's disease or CAE. They weren't that popular. the people that had them were working to develop a breed. Now they're more popular. So that's a trade-off, that when we grow something and when they're as cute and productive and friendly as Nigerians, it's likely that they're going to get more popular. Um, but I still want to make sure that every generation I breed for is better than the generation before. And I'm in it for healthy, long lasting, sustainable goats. I'm not in it for the show ring. I'm not in it for awards, although they're nice. Um, I'm in it for good, healthy caprine friends. Okay? So, last question I'm going to go deal with right now is actually two. Whether or not you have a wether, which is a neutered male, or a doe. If you're only looking at brush goats, if you're only looking at pets, save yourself a lot of money and a lot of hassles and just get yourself a wether. They don't stink. They're not hostile. They're the same goat every day. They don't have hormonal fluctuations. They don't get as big as a buck, but they get larger than a doe. They're very sweet, and they take minimal food, minimal care. Um, and the biggest danger you have to deal with for them is the danger that you had to deal with any goat. Overfeeding will cause urinary calculi. That feeding them grain, they don't really need it. We'll talk more about feeding in a subsequent class, but you can really get by with feeding wethers just some treats and hay. That's all they need. They're just supporting their body. They're not growing babies. They're not making milk. They're not raising up semen. They're just themselves. And hay and treats is all they need. Hay is really all they need, but they really will tell you they need those treats. So what do you have to think about? Well, first of all is horns or not horns. I take horns off all my goats unless somebody asks me otherwise. Our civilization is not trained to deal with animals with horns anymore. I'm trying to change that one person at a time, but farm animals are not walking, talking teddy bears. But having horns on them is something that's optional. Yes, it is painful to take them off. That's why we do it as fast and as young so they forget about it and they recoup really quickly. Biting is another problem. People think they're being bitten by a goat. In order to get bitten by a goat, you have to work at it. There are teeth way in the back of their mouths, up and down, top and bottom jaws. In the front, they have no teeth on the top. They only have teeth on the bottom. Those bottom teeth are very sharp. So people put their hands in their mouths thinking it's really cute, and then those bottom teeth cut. And then the person goes, "Oh, I've been bitten." Well, goats can't get a rabies shot. They can, but it won't do them any good as far as the government's concerned. It will keep them from getting rabies, but legislation hasn't caught up with the fact that there is no certified rabies vaccine. Just like if you give a white-tailed deer a rabies shot, she or he's not going to get rabies. But the risk is still there in the mind of the health department. So you can choose whether you give them the shot or not. But just don't encourage people to put their fingers in your goat's mouth. Do you encourage them to put the fingers in the middle in your dog's mouth? You don't want the dog to bite them. Why would you want your goat to have that problem? Okay? The other thing is you have to watch out for destroying. If they get out of your fence, they will go after your garden, your neighbor's garden, your car, your neighbor's car. Whoever can get them up high and let them taste tasty treats better, they will go there. If you have rhododendron, if you have azalea in your garden, those are right at their level for eating. They will sometimes try to taste one. I lost a goat because she did eat wild rhododendron. You can treat for rhododendron poisoning, but there's no guarantee they're going to come through it. And in fact, Onyx did come through the poisoning and died from a subsequent problem. So Keep that in mind when you're doing your plantings and where you're putting your animals. Don't put rhododendron right next to it, to the fence. Don't put yew right next, yew, right next to the fence. Yew is also poisonous. There are lots of lists online about what's poisonous and what's not poisonous. You can ask me. You can ask your cooperative extension person. Ask another goat breeder. Sometimes those lists are overkill. Sometimes they're just what you need. So make sure you have a link to that list. Look at that when you're doing your plantings and go from there. Okay? So that's it for this introduction. We'll be back in the next class to talk about housing. Okay? Thank you very much for coming to the Goat School. Bye.